Do you remember what you were doing in the 1990s? The 90s brought cultural shifts, grunge hip hop, and neon fashion. The 90s overall was a fun time, but underneath the neon lights and the Backstreet Boys posters, a terrifying rise in intimate partner murders was being hidden. This case talks about how 2.9 million rand created a cesspit of hitmen and a seemingly grieving husband to do what they needed to do for that insurance money. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, and how are we all doing today? The last time we were here, we spoke about the case of Klaas Jonckade and how he went to a conference, he finished the conference, he left in his blue Toyota Yaris, and he was planning to come back for the gala dinner that night, but no one ever saw him alive again. And if you haven't seen that video, I'll link it up here for you. But for today's case, we are going to talk about greed once again, which is clearly a common theme in South African murders. And this case, in the end, will make you think, do people get married for love, or was murder always the plan? Taking out insurance, knowing that your partner has millions on the line if they pass away. If you do claim that money, is it because you are owed that money, or is it premeditation? But with that being said, let's get into today's case.
Intended for mature audiences only.
For today's case, we are starting in Louis Trichardt, which is where Zahida Ahmed was born. Louis Trichardt is in the Limpopo province in South Africa, and it is a region where a lot of mangoes, lychees, bananas, and nuts are grown. It is also known as a very highly creative area in the sense that there are many people who produce a lot of art, crafts like pottery, textiles, and paper. Zahida grew up here. She had a loving childhood, a very supportive and loving family. She grew up with her parents and her siblings in a very loving home. Zahida grew up in a very much Indian community, and her father was very well liked and respected within this community. Her father, Omar, was serving as the Northern Province ANC legislator for some time, and Zahida and her family were practicing Muslims. The whole Ahmed family loved giving back, and they loved the community that they lived in. Zahida had so many hopes and dreams, and she knew from a very young age that she wanted to be a doctor, and she pursued this path throughout her high school career, and she tried really hard to get the grades to be able to get her into a university to pursue this career. During the end of her last year in high school, she was accepted into a medical program at a nearby university. And when she matriculated, she went on to pursue her medical degree. And then, around a year and a half into her studies, Zahida was around 20 years old when she met Omar, which is different to her father Omar. She met another man named Omar, who was 15 years older than her, and his full name was Omar Sabadia. As I mentioned, he was 15 years older than Zahida at the time, and he had moved from India in the 1980s to South Africa, where he now lived, and he had his own practice, and he was a qualified psychiatrist. And Omar Zabadia mainly focused on patients who had PTSD. He would work with a lot of police officers or people who had really bad falls or injuries, who had hit their head in some way and had some kind of mental change, or they had mental health issues. He was really focused in on this area, and there were a lot of patients that came to him for many years with their struggles with their mental health or their PTSD from their jobs. But to put it bluntly, Omar and Zahida immediately hit it off. They really liked each other quite a lot. They had a lot in common. Omar was also in the medical field. Zahida was busy studying to become a doctor. She really liked that he would completely understand the sacrifices that she would need to make, the long hours that she would need to pursue in order to get this degree. But in the beginning, Zahida's parents didn't really like that this man who was 15 years older than their daughter was trying to pursue her and trying to date her. But eventually they came around, they saw how much they really liked each other, they saw how much they got on, and eventually they accepted that Zahida really liked this man and Omar really liked Zahida. Zahida and Omar would get married, and they would end up having 3 children. 1 boy and 2 girls. When they first got married and had one of their first daughters, they lived in a small flat in Pretoria, but they quickly outgrew this. So Omar, Zahida's husband, was quite successful in his own right. Like I said, he had his own practice. And just after their marriage and just after they had their first daughter, apparently Omar's business really became very successful. It almost became viral in a sense, because basically everybody knew about him, allegedly. And he also apparently had a lot of clients. He was a very busy man. He would work very late hours, and he was banking this money because more patients mean more money. But eventually, with all of this money, Omar then purchased a 3 million rand house within Pretoria. And I say house very loosely. It was basically a mansion. It had an aviary, it had a mini golf course, and it had multiple rooms and bathrooms. It was a stunning house. And I know 3 million rand right now will probably get you just a normal house because things are so expensive. But 3 million rand back in the 1990s, even though it's a lot of money now, it was a lot of money back then too. But then things started to go south pretty quickly. Like we said, Omar had this thriving business. He had multiple clients a day. He had lots of people lining up to talk to Dr. Sabadia every day. And this is the image that he showed a lot of people. But in 1995, because Omar worked as a medical professional and in the medical field, he often worked quite closely with medical aides. And this particular medical aide that he was working with, he got a letter from them saying that they are investigating something very suspicious. And because there's a suspicious act that they are investigating, they were immediately going to cut off and stop paying the claims that he was submitting. So in short, the medical aid that he was working with and that he was submitting these claims to found out that he was billing the police medical aid. So remember, Omar was working with a lot of police officers, and every time police officers would come and talk to him, he would bill their specific medical aid to pay for the client that he had just spoken to. So Omar, each month, was billing the police medical aid 600,000 rand every single month, which meant that according to how much he was charging roughly per client, that he would have to see at least 70 police officers a day. And Omar got away with billing this police medical fund for a very long time. He got a lot of money. 600,000 rand a month is ludicrous. And remember, because Omar was saying that he's so successful, he's got this massive company, he just bought a 3 million rand house. Zahida also believed her husband. Why wouldn't she believe her husband? He was bringing in the money. He bought this massive house for them. Why would she not believe what he was saying? And so he would often tell her he's working late, and Zahida believed him. But what he was actually doing, he was not working late. He was not at his practice. What he was doing is gambling away hundreds upon thousands of rand almost every day as well. And so, because of this, he quickly brought his family into bankruptcy. And this family, from incredibly wealthy, and as soon as the medical aid stopped paying these 600,000 rand claims every month, they quickly lost all of their money. Omar then took a bond out on their family home of around 1.2 million rand, but he was not able to pay back this bond at all and in any parts because their family was really struggling. And interestingly enough, when Omar and Zahida first got married, Omar actually took out a 1 million rand life insurance policy out on Zahida. They seemed to agree about it, but I don't think that Zahida ever took out a life insurance policy on Omar. It seems like only he did that on his wife. But because Omar never paid the policy each month, the policy eventually fell away because he wasn't paying for it. But then in 1995, round about the time that Omar found out that he was now becoming bankrupt because he was spending so much money gambling and the medical aid was no longer paying this massive chunk of money. In 1995, Omar and Zahida had a conversation and he took out a 2.9 million rand life insurance policy out on Zahida. Zahida then went to her father, Omar, and she started talking to her parents about this and how she felt so uncomfortable about it, and among other things, especially the point that he was gambling a lot. I'm not sure if Zahida knew about how little their finances were at this point or how much he had run them into debt, but she did know about his gambling and she did speak and confide to her parents about the gambling. And I think while she was having the conversation about him gambling, she brought up that Omar had now taken out this 2.9 million rand life insurance policy out on her. And Omar, her father, told Zahida that he felt really uncomfortable by this. He said that, you're still studying to be a doctor. You're not a doctor. You're not practicing yet. Yes, you're close to receiving that degree, but you're still a student. You have 3 children. Why is it such an enormous amount of money that your husband wants to take out on you? And he really urged his daughter not to sign that document so that he did not have this 2.9 million rand if anything were to happen to her. Her dad thought that it was really strange and he wanted answers for his daughter. Then in January of 1996, Omar and Zahida got into a massive argument because Omar was still gambling. With whatever money they had come in, he was spending it in the casino and running them into severe debt. Zahida kept saying to Omar, I am frustrated, I have had enough. Our 3 children are the most important thing. And at this time, their 3 children were around 9, 6, and 4 years of age. So they were really young and they relied obviously on their parents to be able to provide a lot for them. And Omar, whatever they were bringing in, was just spending it. And Zahida was still a student. She was not bringing in a lot of money at all. And she was relying on Omar to do this because that was the deal. That was the plan. That's what they worked out in their marriage. He was very successful and she was going to be too. But she was still studying and working her way towards this. And Omar was just ruining it all. Zahida would say that she was very conflicted because one part of her really wanted to stay with Omar and try and fix their relationship, to be with the kids. And also she loved her husband. But another part of her said, like, she has had enough. She can't keep stressing about how much money Omar's going to spend if they're going to have enough to feed their children for this month. They're living in this massive house that is racking up a lot of money in bills, and Omar's just not doing his part of this marriage at all. He was making no effort. He was really not helping her in making her feel comfortable in this marriage anymore. And she spoke to her parents about how she felt that she might have to leave this marriage for her children and for herself as well. Zahida was so close to getting this degree. She was now 30 years old. She was raising the 3 kids. She was working really hard towards her medical degree, and she was so close to finishing. As I mentioned right in the beginning, her and her family were practicing Muslims, and in January of 1996 into February, this was the Ramadan period, and Zahida loved cooking for her family. When they had to break fast in the evening, she would make sure that there was a lot of food and they would all be together, all her parents and the children, and she found comfort in this time of year, and she really liked to make sure that everyone was fat and full at the end of the evening. But Zahida really wanted to make sure that everyone ate healthily as well. Obviously they had the nice foods, but she was really against takeaway. She hated having takeaway. Why would you go out and spend the money when she can make it at home and probably even better? And that brings me to our next point. On the 11th of February 1996, Sunday, Omar randomly said to Zahida, I want takeaway. And remember, this is still during Ramadan, still during the fast. And Zahida said, what do you mean? Later in the evening, I'm going to make this really good meal. Why do you want takeaway when we can make better food here? And Omar was like, no, I want takeaway. And they continued to bicker throughout the morning. And eventually Zahida said, you know what? Let's just go get the bloody takeaway. And so in the evening, just around sunset, just before the fast had to break, Zahida and Omar hopped into his car and they headed towards a takeaway place called Bimbo's. And I want you to remember this fact, but Omar, when he got to Bimbo's, he reversed into this parking lot. So the shop wall is here and the door is kind of like over here, and Omar reversed perfectly into this parking space. And it was recalled by the manager who was on duty that time. He said it wasn't very busy, and he saw Omar and Zahida obviously walk into the shop, place their order. Omar then said to Zahida, let's go wait in the car. We can just wait there and we'll wait for our takeaway to come and get called. So Zahida and Omar, they pay for their takeaway and they then go back into Omar's car. And the manager then said that he's busy doing whatever he is, but his back is turned towards the vehicle. So he's probably sorting out their food or sorting out something important. When he then hears a scream, he quickly turns around and he sees 3 men pointing guns at Omar and Zahida, and he sees one of the men drag Zahida and pull her quite roughly and quite violently into the back seat, and they put Omar into the passenger seat. So we've got perpetrator 1, perpetrator 2 in the back seat with Zahida in the middle, and then driver's seat we have perpetrator 3, and then we have Omar in the passenger seat. And he then sees them speed away very quickly, and he also notices at the same time that this vehicle is speeding away, that a taxi, who also happened to notice the exact same thing, this taxi now sees this happen. He then drives after this vehicle, and the taxi said that, weirdly enough, he quickly caught up to the back of this vehicle. It's like they weren't noticing what was around them. They sped out of the parking lot, but as soon as they got onto the road, they kind of just like chilled, and they were just driving casually, the speed limit. And then as soon as they saw the taxi behind them, they quickly started speeding up and then got onto a freeway and lost the taxi. But immediately after the taxi had lost them, he then went to the closest police station to report what he had just seen. Then, hours later, after Omar had just been kidnapped along with his wife Zahida, at 2 a.m. on the 12th of February 1996, Omar, like I said, had just been kidnapped. He then walked around 10 kilometers past the hospital towards the takeaway place Bimbo's. Because it was 2 a.m., this takeaway place was not open, and Omar then immediately started knocking on neighbors' doors who lived around the area. The neighbors were obviously shocked, and as soon as they saw Omar, they took him to the hospital. And then when Omar was in the hospital, the medical staff called the police because he said that he had been stabbed and also his wife had been kidnapped. So they called the police and they reported what Omar was saying. Omar then told police that he had been hit everywhere, he had been punched, and he had been stabbed, and that 3 perpetrators had driven away inside his vehicle with his wife in the back seat. So the medical staff are obviously worried. They've seen a little bit of blood on his top and they now want to do their part because the police have now come, but the medical staff obviously need to perform their role. And when the medical staff and the nurses kind of lift up his shirt, they kind of have a double look because they're like, where's the blood? So Omar had barely been cut. He had little scratch marks that looked like someone had actually scratched him, not like a knife had stabbed him. And he didn't have any obvious bruising. He might have been slapped around and hit, but he didn't have any like black eyes or anything. He didn't have that type of bruising. And like I said, the medical staff had to really do a double take because they saw blood on his t-shirt, but it didn't match what the injuries were to his body. So the police left Omar in the hospital because obviously he was in safe hands with the medical staff getting treated for his really bloody wounds. But he had now been left in the hospital. Police had now left to go and investigate where Zahida was because they still had a missing and kidnapped person. Immediately after Zahida's family was notified, the community and her family stepped up. They had called everyone that they knew. They tried to get a search party together almost immediately to try and search the vicinity where Omar had been dropped off and also to see maybe if there were any other clues there as well. But Zahida's father thought that because Omar kept saying Omar in the hospital, he kept saying that they want ransom, they took Zahida for ransom. And then Omar, Zahida's father, said, okay, but why would they, if they wanted ransom, why would they drop you off and then take Zahida when 2 people surely are better priced than 1 person? Can't you get more money for 2 rather than 1? So Zahida's father didn't think anything suspiciously in terms of Omar being involved at all, but he thought that this whole story was just not adding up too well. But back to Zahida's family, like I said, they were immediately on the ground running. They printed posters, they put flyers everywhere. They went from Pretoria to Joburg looking for Zahida. They tried everywhere to find her, to find Omar's car, but they didn't come up lucky for the next couple of days. Then a few days after the hijacking, Omar's car was found near a railway line and there was a lot of blood in the back seat, but Zahida was nowhere to be found. Then 2 weeks after Zahida first went missing or she was first kidnapped, Zahida's parents enlisted the help of a private investigator. The private investigator was an ex-police officer and his name was Slung van Sale, and Slung then enlisted the help of a close friend named Jack LaGrange, and these 2 worked together on trying to piece together what happened to Zahida. And these guys were really tough, no-nonsense kind of men. They were big, they were bulky, they were muscular, and they were quite intimidating to a lot of people, and they really got shit done, basically. First, they started with Omar's statement, and they read through the statement, and Slung immediately said to his partner Jack that something isn't right. I don't necessarily believe what Omar is saying. Then once Slung and Jack had read Omar's statement, they then went to the hospital where Omar had left now. It's been a couple of weeks and his injuries were fine. And they went to the hospital, they spoke to the doctor who had looked at Omar's injuries. And the doctor said that, yes, he is not an expert on how injuries are made. He is only an expert on how to fix these injuries. But he said to Slung and Jack that he believes that these injuries were self-inflicted. They were scratch marks, yes, that had broken the skin slightly, but there were no stab wounds on his body at all. And he also said that he believed that Omar did this to himself. Then the investigators decided to go to Bimbo. Bimbo was the takeaway place that Omar and Zahida were kidnapped from, and which is the initial crime scene. They walked in and they spoke to the manager who was on duty that night. And the first thing that this manager said to him was that he noticed how meticulous Omar was about reverse parking into this parking spot. He said that, of course, it's not uncommon for people to reverse park, but he said that all the other cars around didn't reverse park, and he just thought this was really strange. And the manager also said that Omar had parked specifically away from other cars. There were parkings like right opposite the door, like you could walk straight in from your car. That's how close there were parkings available. But Omar chose to park slightly away from the door, and with parking spaces kind of open on both sides. And the manager said it just looked like, you could easily swing the doors open from this parking spot, and that's all he thought, that's why he did it. And Slung, being a private investigator, he did follow Omar around for a little bit while this investigation was taking place, and he said that as he was following Omar around, he never once ever saw him reverse park again. He followed him to work, he followed him to the grocery stores, and he never saw him reverse park. So could it be a coincidence or something more sinister? So if we go back to Bimbo's, when Slung and Jack were talking to the manager, they also then walked next door to the petrol station. So we have Bimbo's, the takeaway, and we have a bit of parking here in front. And then kind of in the same parking lot next to Bimbo's, the takeaway, was a petrol station. And they shared similar parking spots. They kind of were in one unit. And Slung and Jack then went to speak to one of the attendants who were working at the petrol station. And this petrol attendant asked Slung and Jack to come into like the little shop that they had where they would pay, where you could pay for the petrol and everything. So he asked Slung and Jack to follow him, and him and one of his colleagues said to the private investigators that on that day that Omar and Zahida were kidnapped or hijacked, basically there was a man who had come into this little shop and showed them a picture of this car, and he had asked them the same question twice. He had asked them, have you seen this vehicle? Has a vehicle of this description ever come to this parking lot? Have you seen it in the last couple of minutes? And both the petrol attendant and his colleague both said no. And then roughly 30 minutes after the second time that this random guy asked about this vehicle, a vehicle then reverse parked outside of Bimbo's, and Zahida and Omar walked out of this vehicle and went into Bimbo's. So there was a random guy waiting for this vehicle to arrive there. And if Omar really wanted takeaways so randomly on Sunday, the 11th of Feb, 1996, if he wanted takeaways so randomly, surely he and Zahida were the only people who knew that they were going to Bimbo's that night. But clearly someone must have told this other man that Omar and Zahida were going to be there. And then the private investigators struck gold. And basically a random anonymous caller, they don't know who this person is, but this person called them and said that he has to tell them something really important because he believes that it is relevant to this case and it could really help solve this case. This anonymous man then said to the private investigators that he was approached by a man in January of 1996 called Patrick. Patrick said he was looking for someone to pull off a hit on behalf of his friend and doctor. The caller said that he declined but referred him to two other men. Now the next information is slightly blurred, and this information is blurred because we don't know how Omar was arrested. The information that I saw, one side said that Omar was arrested because he handed himself in after this anonymous caller said that some doctor needed help to murder his wife. But Omar apparently turned himself in. But other reports say that Patrick, the hitman, he was found and then he gave up that Omar was the doctor. And these are two conflicting reports, but either way, Omar was arrested and three other men were then named. And when Omar was arrested, Zahida's family were absolutely shocked. Like I said, they had suspicions about what Omar first said to police, but in no way did they ever think that their daughter's husband would ever think about murdering their beloved Zahida. But when Omar was brought into the interrogation room, he didn't hold back at all. He said to the police officers exactly what was on his mind, and he basically confessed. He said, yes, it was him, and he did hire a hitman to kill his wife. And he did in fact have a patient named Patrick Manyape. And Patrick then hired two other men who were also involved in the killing of his wife. Omar then confessed to the hijacking and hiring of these three men and to the murder of his wife. He did say that his wife is not alive and that he can take them to exactly where he believes her body is. Omar then led police officers to the general area where he believed that his wife was. Cadaver dogs arrived shortly after and Zahida's body was found. By the time that Zahida was found, her body had been missing for 20 days. And February in South Africa is a very hot time. It is the height of summer. And when the dogs found her, she had been badly decomposed. It also looked like someone opened her bag and chucked all of her belongings around the tree that she was found tied to. Zahida's dad believed that Omar may have killed her for the life insurance money and because Omar knew that Zahida was potentially planning to leave him. But Omar Sabadia was arrested for the murder of his wife, Zahida, along with 3 other men. Patrick Manyape was a patient of Omar's since 1991, and Patrick had actually fallen from quite a substantial height. It seemed like he had been working on a ladder or on a roof, and he had fallen and basically fallen on his head, and he had received severe brain injury from this fall. And Patrick was at Omar because his mental state had changed quite a lot since the fall, and he had slight personality changes as well. So Patrick said that he was very much brainwashed by Omar. He said he trusted Omar because he was his doctor for so long. And Patrick said that when Omar would talk about his wife and how Zahida would do certain things, Patrick said that it really infuriated him, and he just wanted to really hurt Zahida because of what Omar would say. And Omar also said to his patient Patrick that Zahida was spending all of their family money, she was gambling all the time, she was bringing them more and more into debt, and he was telling this to Patrick, who was getting more and more infuriated and clearly wanted to hurt Zahida because what Omar was saying. And Omar also said to Patrick that he believed that Zahida was going to leave him and possibly kill him, because Omar believed that Zahida was in a relationship with another man, and that he felt that Zahida wanted to kill him because then she could be with her lover. Then Albert Muketsani was arrested, along with the third accomplice, Richard Malema. And Richard and Albert, along with Patrick, all agreed to murder Zahida for 70,000 Rand each. Patrick had recruited the 2 of them based on this other guy who, remember, had said to Patrick that, what about these guys? I don't want to kill anyone, but I know some people who will. Remember that anonymous phone call? That anonymous guy said to Patrick, contact these 2, they'll probably do the dirty work for you. And they did. Patrick, Albert, and Richard all then arranged a firearm, and they spoke to Omar, and they then arranged for the 11th of February 1996 to hash out the plan that they had all spoken about. Then on the 11th of Feb, they were all waiting in that parking lot and waiting for Zahida and Omar to arrive. After the hijacking, they then dropped Omar off at that spot that he had asked for, and Omar then walked the 10 kilometers back to Bimbo's, and the 3 of them then drove off with Zahida in the back of the car. And I honestly can't imagine what Zahida must have gone through in that moment, because when Omar got out of that vehicle, she was still alive. She was very much alive, and Omar, she basically watched this man that she married, the father of her children, just get out of the vehicle. I don't know if they had any conversations in the car, but like, oh, let's drop it off here. You still got Zahida, okay, cool. I don't know if that kind of conversation happened and if she heard that. But imagine what must have been going through her head when she just watched her husband walk off, leave her in the car with these 3 strange men, not knowing what was going to happen to her. But near to where Zahida's body was found, the 3 of them then stopped off on the side of the road, and they forced Zahida to get out of the car and walk more into the bush. And once the 3 men that they were far enough into the bush where the cars passing by couldn't see them, that's where they then strangled Zahida with a rain jacket, and they tied Zahida with the same rain jacket to a tree. During the trial, all 4 pleaded not guilty. They said that yes, they confessed, but they now want to take the confessions back because they were beaten and forced to give this confession by the police and the investigating officers. It was also reported that Omar said to Zahida that he wants to leave the country and escape his debt, possibly back to India. Zahida said no. Her entire family lived here in South Africa, and she was so close to qualifying to being a doctor, and she does not want to go anywhere with her criminal of a husband just to escape his debt. Near the end of 1996, all 4 men were found guilty of the charges placed against them. Omar Sabadia was sentenced to 50 years in prison, and the judge said specifically that he was to serve a minimum of 35 years. Albert Muketsani was sentenced to 40 years, and both Richard Malema and Patrick Mayape were sentenced to 25 years each. Patrick appealed his sentence, and he actually won, and his sentence was reduced to 15 years, and that was on the basis that Omar and Patrick had quite an imbalance of power in terms of their relationship. Patrick was obviously Omar's patient, and Patrick looked up to Omar very much within their patient and doctor relationship. Zahida Ahmed in the end was granted an honorary doctorate when her class graduated, and this doctorate was handed to her family. Zahida's children lived with her parents, and they grew up with all the love that they could get from them. They never visited their dad the entire time that he was in prison, and they wanted nothing to do with him. Then in 2007, Patrick was released on parole, and then 2 years later, Richard would also follow, and he would also be paroled. Then in October of 2019, Omar was actually released, and yes, this was not 35 years, and this was due to technicalities and because the law in South Africa changed based on what the minimum requirements were in terms of sentencing for prisoners. So because the sentencing had now been reduced to how long prisoners can actually be in prison before they are paroled, Omar had passed this, and now because he had served at least 20 years, he was now basically eligible for parole, and he was paroled in October of 2019. Then 4 years after Omar Sabadia had been paroled, he did pass away at the age of 72 due to a prolonged illness. And by all accounts, Zahida's children have become quite successful. Both of her daughters have law degrees and her son has a finance degree, and they are all successful in their own rights. And they grew up with very much all of the love that Zahida's parents gave Zahida. They then passed on to her children as well. And like I said, I can't imagine what Zahida must have gone through in that vehicle, knowing that she had been betrayed by the one person who was supposed to protect and love her. But let me know what you think of this case down below. I hope you're all staying safe, and I'll see you again next time. Bye.